They say a single moment can change the course of an entire lifetime. But on that warm spring evening in Chicago, Avery Brooks had no idea that one unexpected encounter would one day become the foundation of a family she never imagined. The grand ballroom of the Starlight Foundation Gala shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, filling the room with soft golden light and quiet elegance. Avery adjusted the sleeve of her navy evening dress and took a slow breath before stepping farther into the crowd. As a pediatric nurse, she felt slightly out of place among celebrities, executives, and philanthropists, yet the hospital where she worked had selected her as one of the honored guests because of her years of service to children facing difficult medical challenges. Even so, she planned to stay for an hour, make polite conversation, and leave before the evening became too overwhelming. Across the ballroom, Grant Whitmore stood surrounded by investors, reporters, and business leaders. At 38 years old, he had built Whitmore Capital into one of the most influential financial firms in the country. People admired his success, respected his intelligence, and envied his fortune. Yet despite the constant attention, Grant often felt strangely disconnected from the world around him. Conversations rarely felt genuine. Smiles often seemed transactional. The gala looked beautiful, but to him it felt like another obligation on a calendar filled with obligations. As a string quartet played softly near the center of the room, Avery stepped aside toward a quiet terrace overlooking the Chicago River. The cool evening breeze offered welcome relief from the crowded ballroom. She leaned lightly against the railing and admired the reflections dancing across the water below. For the first time all evening, she felt relaxed. Moments later, the terrace door opened. Grant stepped outside, clearly searching for a brief escape from the endless networking inside. Neither noticed the other immediately. Then their eyes met. For a second, both seemed surprised to find someone else seeking the same refuge. Grant offered a polite smile. Avery returned it. What began as a simple greeting slowly became a conversation. They spoke about the city, their careers, their favorite childhood memories, and the unexpected paths that had shaped their lives. There was no discussion of wealth or status. Avery did not recognize Grant as one of the event's major sponsors. Grant never mentioned it. For the first time in years, he found himself speaking honestly. Avery listened without judgment. She shared stories about her young patients and the lessons they taught her about courage and gratitude. Time seemed to move differently on that terrace. The noise of the gala faded into the background. Two strangers discovered a rare sense of comfort in one another's presence. Later, as the evening drew to a close, an unexpected scheduling mix-up created confusion among departing guests. Cars arrived in the wrong order. Attendees were directed through different exits. In the chaos, Avery received an urgent call from the hospital regarding one of her patients and left quickly. Grant searched for her several minutes later, hoping to say goodbye, but she was already gone. No phone number, no last name, no way to find her. Standing beneath the city lights, he looked toward the empty street and felt an unfamiliar disappointment. Meanwhile, Avery sat in the back of a taxi heading toward the hospital, thinking about the kind stranger she would probably never see again. Neither knew that fate had only just begun writing their story. Some discoveries arrive quietly, changing a life long before anyone understands their meaning. Nearly 7 weeks after the gala, Avery Brooks sat alone inside a small examination room at Lakeside Women's Health Center. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting thin bands of gold across the floor. A framed photograph of a newborn baby hung on the wall opposite her chair. Normally, such details would have gone unnoticed. Today, every detail seemed unusually vivid. Her hands rested gently in her lap as she waited for the physician to return with the final results. The past several weeks had been filled with long hospital shifts, restless nights, and a growing feeling that something in her life was changing. She had initially dismissed the signs as exhaustion. After all, caring for young patients demanded energy and emotional strength. Yet deep inside, she already suspected the truth. The door opened softly. Dr. Ellen Mercer entered carrying a folder and a warm expression. She sat down across from Avery and opened the chart. For a moment, she seemed unusually careful choosing her words. Avery felt her heartbeat quicken. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The doctor smiled gently. "Everything appears healthy." Relief washed through Avery's chest. Then Dr. Mercer continued. "You are pregnant." The words settled into the quiet room. Avery lowered her eyes briefly. Despite expecting the answer, hearing it spoken aloud felt different. Real. Life-changing. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind at once. The gala. The stranger she had never forgotten. The conversation beneath the city lights. The connection that had felt impossible to explain. She had never seen him again. She did not even know where to begin looking for him. Yet somehow their brief encounter had left behind something far more important than either could have imagined. Avery slowly nodded as emotion filled her eyes. I understand. Dr. Mercer glanced down at the ultrasound report and hesitated again. There is something else. Avery looked up. Something wrong? No. The doctor replied quickly. Not wrong. Just very rare. She turned the monitor slightly toward Avery. You are carrying 4 babies. The room became completely silent. Avery stared at the screen. For tiny heartbeats flickered like distant stars. For separate lives growing together. For several seconds, she could not speak. She had prepared herself for many possibilities. This was not one of them. Tears gathered in her eyes as she pressed a hand gently against her stomach. The reality felt overwhelming. Beautiful. Terrifying. Miraculous. All at the same time. During the drive home, the city seemed strangely different. Every traffic light, every passing building, every familiar street suddenly belonged to a future she had never planned. That evening she sat by her apartment window holding the ultrasound photographs. Outside, Chicago moved through another ordinary night. Inside, nothing was ordinary anymore. She studied the tiny images again and again. For heartbeats. For futures. For reasons to be brave. Somewhere across the city, Grant Whitmore continued searching for answers he could not find. He occasionally thought about the woman from the terrace and wondered where life had taken her. He had no idea that the greatest chapter of his story had already begun. As midnight approached, Avery placed the ultrasound photographs beside her bed and made a decision. Whatever challenges waited ahead, she would protect these children. She would give them love. She would give them a home. And until fate chose otherwise, she would carry this extraordinary secret alone. Some people leave a lasting mark on a heart. Others leave behind an entire future. The months that followed became the most challenging and transformative period of Avery Brooks's life. Each day seemed divided between hope and uncertainty. Her pregnancy progressed under careful medical supervision, and every appointment reminded her just how extraordinary her situation truly was. Carrying 4 babies required constant monitoring, additional rest, and sacrifices she had never anticipated. Yet whenever she saw the ultrasound images or heard the steady rhythm of 4 tiny heartbeats, her fears softened. The children already felt like miracles. As summer faded into autumn, Avery made a decision that surprised even her closest friends. She would leave Chicago. The city held too many unanswered questions and too many memories attached to a man she could not find. She had considered searching for him countless times. More than once, she had replayed every detail from that evening at the gala, wondering whether fate had made a mistake by separating them. But she knew almost nothing about him. No address, no phone number, no way to reconnect. Eventually, she stopped chasing possibilities and focused on preparing for reality. With the support of a former nursing supervisor, Avery accepted a position at a children's medical center in Milwaukee. The opportunity offered stability, excellent healthcare benefits, and a quieter environment in which to raise a family. She rented a modest home on a tree-lined street near the hospital and began building a new life one day at a time. Meanwhile, Grant Whitmore continued moving through a world defined by success. Whitmore Capital expanded into new markets. Business magazines featured him on their covers. Industry conferences invited him to speak. Financial analysts praised his leadership. To everyone watching from the outside, he appeared to have everything. Yet there were moments when the accomplishments felt strangely empty. Late at night, after meetings ended and the city lights dimmed beyond his penthouse windows, his thoughts often drifted back to the woman from the terrace. He could still remember her smile, her kindness, the way she listened without expecting anything in return. More than once, he instructed assistants to review guest lists from the gala. The search led nowhere. Eventually, even his closest colleagues stopped hearing him mention her. But forgetting proved impossible. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered Milwaukee in blankets of white as Avery entered the final stage of her pregnancy. The delivery required a specialized medical team and careful planning. Friends from the hospital offered support. Neighbors brought meals. The community around her quietly became family. Then, on a cold February morning, the day finally arrived. Hours later, 4 healthy babies entered the world. 2 boys, 2 girls. The nurses called them little miracles. Avery could not stop smiling through tears as she held them one by one. Tiny fingers wrapped around hers. Tiny faces stared back with innocent wonder. In that moment, every fear she had carried disappeared. The future no longer felt uncertain. It felt meaningful. Several days later, after returning home, she placed 4 small cribs beside one another in the nursery. Soft sunlight filled the room. Standing quietly near the doorway, she watched her children sleep. Then she opened a drawer and looked at the old gala invitation she had kept all these years. For a brief moment, she thought about the stranger who would never know what fate had created. Then she carefully closed the drawer and turned back toward the nursery. Her life belonged to the future now, and 4 tiny miracles were waiting for her there. 4 years can transform a life in ways no one expects. On a bright spring morning, Avery Brooks stood in her kitchen packing 4 school lunches while the sound of children's laughter echoed through the house. The once quiet home now overflowed with energy, questions, and endless movement. Mason loved asking how everything worked. Jordan could never sit still for more than a few minutes. Harper carried a sketchbook everywhere she went. Little Savannah greeted every day as if it were an adventure waiting to happen. Together they filled every corner of Avery's world with purpose. Life was not always easy. There were medical appointments, school activities, bills, and countless responsibilities. Some nights, she fell asleep exhausted before her head touched the pillow. Yet every morning, she woke up grateful. The children reminded her daily that miracles often arrive disguised as challenges. As the years passed, certain similarities became impossible to ignore. Mason shared the same focused expression that Avery remembered from the stranger she had met years ago. Jordan possessed the same confident walk. Harper had a habit of studying people before speaking, while Savannah's bright smile seemed capable of lighting up an entire room. Occasionally, Avery would notice these details and feel a brief ache of curiosity. Then life would pull her attention elsewhere. The children needed her. That was what mattered most. Across the country, Grant Whitmore's life continued moving at remarkable speed. Whitmore Capital had expanded into one of the largest investment firms in North America. New offices opened. Revenues increased. Awards accumulated. Financial publications called him one of the most influential business leaders of his generation. Yet success never filled the quiet spaces in his life the way people assumed it would. During interviews, reporters often asked about his future. They expected conversations about acquisitions, innovation, or growth. Instead, Grant occasionally found himself thinking about family, about connection, about the feeling he had experienced during a single evening years earlier. Although he rarely spoke of it, the memory remained. One autumn evening, after completing a television interview in New York, Grant returned to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city glittered beneath the darkness like a sea of stars. He loosened his tie and walked toward the window. A framed photograph on a nearby shelf caught his attention. It showed his parents decades earlier, standing together beside the small office where his father had launched the family business. They looked happy, not because they were wealthy, because they belonged to each other. Grant stared at the photograph longer than usual. For the first time in years, he admitted something to himself. Despite all his achievements, he felt alone. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Avery tucked 4 children into bed after reading their favorite story. The house slowly grew quiet. She walked through the hallway, turning off lights one by one before pausing outside the nursery she had transformed years ago into a playroom. A small box remained stored on the highest shelf. Inside rested a faded gala invitation and an old memory she had never completely released. She looked at the box for a moment before closing the closet door. Some chapters belonged in the past, or so she believed. Neither Avery nor Grant realized that fate was already preparing to bring their worlds together once again. After years of separate journeys, the distance between them was about to disappear. And this time, neither would walk away unchanged. Sometimes fate does not knock gently. Sometimes it arrives disguised as an ordinary day. The reunion began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Avery Brooks had just finished a shift at the Children's Medical Center when her phone rang. The number belonged to the elementary school attended by all 4 children. Her heart immediately tightened. The school nurse explained that Jordan had slipped during recess and twisted his ankle. The injury did not appear serious, but she recommended an examination to be safe. Within 30 minutes, Avery arrived at the pediatric clinic connected to the hospital. Jordan sat on an examination table looking more embarrassed than injured while Mason, Harper, and Savannah waited nearby. After a quick evaluation, the physician confirmed that Jordan would recover completely with a few days of rest. Relief washed through Avery's chest. She thanked the staff and prepared to leave. Then movement in the hallway caught her attention. A group of executives and hospital administrators walked through the pediatric wing accompanied by photographers and local media representatives. At the center of the group stood a familiar figure. For a moment, Avery thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The years seemed to disappear instantly. Grant Whitmore walked beside the hospital director, discussing a major charitable partnership between Whitmore Capital and several children's healthcare programs. He looked older than she remembered, but only slightly. More confident, more accomplished, yet unmistakably the same man. Avery froze. Across the hallway, Grant turned casually toward one of the patient rooms. His gaze moved across the crowd, then stopped. Time seemed to slow. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The hallway noise faded into the background. For years vanished beneath a single moment of recognition. Grant knew immediately. The woman from the terrace. The woman he had searched for and never forgotten. Avery's heartbeat raced as dozens of emotions collided inside her at once. Surprise, shock, curiosity, fear. Before either could react, Savannah tugged gently on Avery's sleeve. "Mom, who is that?" The question broke the spell. Grant's eyes lowered toward the children standing beside her. For young faces looked back at him with innocent curiosity. Something stirred inside him that he could not explain. A strange sense of familiarity. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper. The hospital director continued speaking, unaware of the emotional earthquake unfolding nearby. Finally, Grant stepped forward. "Avery." Her name left his lips almost as a question. She nodded slowly. "Hello, Grant." A smile appeared on his face. Genuine. Unrehearsed. "I cannot believe this." Neither could she. The children watched with fascination as 2 adults behaved like people who had discovered a ghost from the past. Grant glanced toward the 4 children again. "These are your children?" Avery swallowed carefully. "Yes." He smiled warmly. "They are beautiful." Mason studied him with open curiosity. Harper quietly moved closer to her mother. Jordan asked whether his ankle meant he could still play soccer next week. Savannah simply smiled. Grant found himself unexpectedly charmed. For several minutes, they spoke about ordinary things. Careers. Life. Time. Yet beneath every word lingered countless unasked questions. Eventually, the administrators signaled that the tour needed to continue. Grant hesitated. For years, he had wondered whether he would ever see Avery again. Now fate was asking him to walk away a second time. He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "Would you have dinner with me sometime?" Avery looked at the card resting in her hand. The future suddenly felt uncertain in ways it had not felt for years. "Maybe," she answered softly. Grant smiled. "I will take maybe." As he disappeared down the hallway, neither realized that the reunion fate had arranged was only the beginning of a much greater truth waiting to be revealed. Some truths reveal themselves slowly, one small detail at a time. The days following their unexpected reunion lingered in Grant Whitmore's thoughts far more than he expected. He had attended hundreds of meetings since becoming the head of Whitmore Capital. He had met thousands of people, yet none occupied his mind the way Avery Brooks did. Not only because she had reappeared after 4 years, but because something about the children continued to stay with him. Their faces, their expressions, the strange sense of familiarity he could not explain. A week after their encounter at the hospital, Avery finally accepted his invitation to dinner. They met at a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. The evening felt surprisingly comfortable. Neither tried to impress the other. They simply talked. Avery shared stories about raising 4 energetic children. Grant spoke honestly about the pressures of building a company and the loneliness that sometimes accompanied success. Hours passed unnoticed. For the first time in years, both found themselves laughing easily. As their conversations continued over the following weeks, Grant gradually became a small but consistent presence in the children's lives. It began innocently. A visit to a science museum after Mason mentioned his fascination with engineering. A youth soccer match where Jordan proudly showed off his improving skills. An art exhibition featuring children's work where Harper displayed one of her drawings. A weekend community fair where Savannah convinced everyone to ride the carousel twice. Grant enjoyed every moment more than he expected. What surprised him most was how natural everything felt. The children seemed comfortable around him. He felt comfortable around them. One Saturday afternoon, while helping Mason assemble a model bridge for a school project, Grant noticed the boy concentrating intensely. The expression was startlingly familiar. He had seen that same look in the mirror countless times. Later that evening, Savannah laughed at one of Jordan's jokes. The sound immediately reminded him of his own younger sister. Harper tilted her head while studying a painting in a museum exactly the way Grant did when evaluating business proposals. Individually, the similarities meant nothing. Together, they became impossible to ignore. The questions began quietly. Then they grew louder. One evening, Grant sat alone in his office reviewing old photographs from family gatherings. The resemblance between certain childhood pictures and the children unsettled him. Not because he wanted to believe anything extraordinary, because he was beginning to fear it might be true. Meanwhile, Avery sensed the change. She noticed the thoughtful looks, the longer pauses during conversations, the moments when Grant watched the children with an intensity that carried deeper meaning. Part of her had always known this day might come. Fate could hide a secret for only so long. The turning point arrived unexpectedly during a charity fundraiser at the hospital. Savannah accidentally scraped her knee while playing outside. The injury was minor, but a nurse cleaned the small wound and placed a bandage over it. During the process, routine paperwork required updated family medical information. Grant happened to be standing nearby when he overheard a discussion about blood types. A simple detail, yet it immediately captured his attention. Later that night, curiosity refused to let him rest. Facts began aligning in ways he could no longer dismiss. Dates, timelines, ages, possibilities. The realization formed slowly, then all at once. His heart pounded as understanding finally emerged from years of unanswered questions. The children had entered the world months after the night he met Avery. For children, for miracles, for years of memories he had never known existed. Sitting alone beneath the glow of his office lamp, Grant stared out at the city skyline and whispered the question he had been avoiding. What if those children were his? The answer arrived on a quiet evening filled with more emotion than Grant Whitmore had experienced in years. After days of reflection and several difficult conversations with trusted legal and medical advisors, he finally gathered the courage to speak openly with Avery Brooks. They met at a small lakeside park just before sunset while the children played nearby. A gentle breeze moved across the water as golden light reflected against the surface of the lake. Grant stood silently for several moments before speaking. Avery immediately sensed the seriousness in his expression. "You know," she said softly. He nodded. There was no reason to pretend anymore. Too many pieces had fallen into place. Too many questions finally had answers. For a moment neither spoke. The years between them seemed impossibly large. Then Grant looked toward the children laughing near the playground. Emotion filled his voice. "Are they mine?" Avery closed her eyes briefly. The question she had imagined for 4 years had finally arrived. When she looked back at him, tears shimmered in her eyes. Yes. The single word changed everything. Grant lowered his head as the reality settled into his heart. For children. For birthdays he had missed. For first steps. For first words. For years of memories he could never recover. Yet beneath the sadness came something even stronger. Gratitude. They were healthy. They were loved. They were here. Avery explained everything. The pregnancy. The move to Milwaukee. The uncertainty. The impossibility of finding him after that night. She never blamed him. She never accused him. She simply shared the truth. Grant listened carefully. By the time she finished, he understood something important. Avery had never kept the children from him out of anger. She had simply been surviving, protecting them, building a life with the tools she had. "You carried all of this alone," he said quietly. Avery smiled sadly. "Not alone. I had them." Grant looked toward the playground again. Mason was helping Savannah climb a small structure. Jordan was racing across the grass. Harper sat nearby drawing in her sketchbook. His children. The words still felt unbelievable. Over the following weeks, Grant made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He rearranged his schedule. He postponed non-essential business travel. He spent weekends in Milwaukee instead of luxury resorts or corporate retreats. He wanted time. Not headlines. Not publicity. Time. The children adjusted at their own pace. Mason asked endless questions about business and engineering. Jordan challenged Grant to soccer matches in the backyard. Harper quietly observed him before gradually opening up. Savannah accepted him almost immediately and proudly introduced him to everyone as her special friend. Avery watched the transformation carefully. She expected promises. Instead, she saw consistency. Grant never tried to buy affection. He showed up, again and again. School performances, doctor appointments, weekend breakfasts. Simple moments became the foundation of trust. One evening after a family picnic, the children ran ahead toward the house while Avery and Grant walked slowly behind them. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. "They are starting to love you," Avery said. Grant smiled softly. "I am the lucky one." Then his expression grew serious. "I cannot change the past." "No," Avery replied gently. "You cannot." He looked toward the children waiting at the front porch. "But I would like to be part of every future memory." For the first time since their reunion, Avery allowed herself to imagine what that future might look like. And standing beneath the fading sunlight, both realized that a family was not being discovered. It was being built. Real trust is never built in a single moment. It is built through 1,000 small choices repeated day after day. Summer arrived with long afternoons, bright skies, and a sense of peace Avery Brooks had not felt in years. For the first time since becoming a mother, she no longer carried every responsibility alone. Grant Whitmore had become a steady presence in the lives of the children. Not because he had promised to, because he chose to. Week after week, he continued showing up. When Mason participated in a regional science competition, Grant spent evenings helping him test ideas and build prototypes. When Jordan struggled through a disappointing soccer season, Grant sat beside him on the sidelines and reminded him that effort mattered more than trophies. When Harper entered a local art showcase, Grant stood proudly among the visitors, studying every drawing as though it belonged in a museum. When Savannah became nervous before a school performance, he sat in the front row and waved until her smile returned. The children gradually stopped viewing him as a visitor. He became part of their routines, part of their stories, part of their home. Even the neighbors began noticing the change. Weekend bicycle rides became family traditions. Sunday breakfasts stretched into hours filled with laughter. Holiday celebrations felt warmer, more complete. Yet the greatest transformation happened between Avery and Grant. Years earlier, fate had introduced them as strangers. Now they were learning how to become partners. One evening after the children had fallen asleep, they sat together on the back porch watching fireflies drift through the summer darkness. The neighborhood was quiet. Soft music played from a nearby house. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Grant looked toward the kitchen window where children's drawings decorated the refrigerator. "You built all of this," he said quietly. Avery smiled. "We built it." He shook his head gently. "No, you carried it through the hardest years." Emotion touched his voice. "I wish I had been there." Avery looked at him carefully. "So do I." The honesty lingered between them. Then she reached for his hand. "But wishing cannot change the past." Grant nodded slowly. "I know. What matters is what you do now." He looked at their joined hands and realized she was giving him something more valuable than forgiveness. She was giving him a chance. The weeks that followed brought even more evidence that family had become their shared future. During a school project, the children were asked to create a family tree. When Avery later found the finished assignment on the dining room table, her eyes filled with tears. At the center of the page stood 6 smiling figures holding hands. Mason had carefully written every name beneath the drawings. Grant's name appeared beside hers. Not separated. Together. The children had already accepted a truth that the adults were still learning to say aloud. Later that night, Grant discovered the picture resting on the kitchen counter. He studied it for a long time. Then he quietly folded it and placed it inside his wallet. It became the most valuable thing he owned. Standing alone beneath the kitchen light, he finally understood something that years of success had never taught him. Wealth could build companies. It could buy buildings and opportunities. But family was built differently. Family was earned through love, patience, and presence. And for the first time in his life, Grant knew exactly what mattered most. The most beautiful endings often begin as impossible dreams. Nearly a year had passed since Grant Whitmore first learned the truth about the children, and life had settled into a rhythm filled with warmth, laughter, and belonging. What once seemed fragile had become strong. What once seemed uncertain had become undeniable. On a bright autumn weekend, Avery Brooks loaded beach chairs into the back of a vehicle while the children rushed excitedly around the driveway. Grant had planned a family trip to the shores of Lake Michigan, promising a day free from schedules, meetings, and responsibilities. The children counted down the days with excitement. Mason packed a notebook filled with engineering sketches. Jordan brought a soccer ball. Harper carried her favorite sketchbook. Savannah insisted on bringing a small bucket for collecting seashells. By late afternoon, the shoreline glowed beneath golden sunlight. Waves rolled gently toward the sand while a cool breeze drifted across the water. The family spent hours walking, laughing, and creating memories together. Avery watched from a distance as Grant helped Jordan practice soccer near the water's edge. A few yards away, Mason excitedly explained one of his latest inventions. Harper sat drawing the scene in her sketchbook while Savannah searched carefully for the perfect shell. Looking at them together, Avery felt something she had not allowed herself to fully feel for many years. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when a heart finally stops waiting for what is missing. As the sun slowly descended toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold, orange, and rose, Grant gathered everyone near a small wooden boardwalk overlooking the lake. The children immediately noticed the unusual seriousness in his expression. Savannah tilted her head curiously. "Why are you smiling like that?" she asked. Laughter rippled through the group. Grant looked toward Avery. For a moment, neither spoke. The lake shimmered behind them. The wind moved gently through the tall grass surrounding the boardwalk. Then Grant stepped forward and reached into his jacket pocket. Avery's breath caught instantly. The children exchanged excited glances. Grant lowered himself onto one knee. Emotion filled his eyes. "Years ago, I met a woman for one evening and thought I had lost her forever." Avery felt tears gathering already. "Then fate gave me something far greater than I ever deserved. It gave me a second chance." The children watched silently. "You gave 4 extraordinary children a life filled with love. You carried every burden when I was not there. You built a family, and then somehow, you made room for me inside it." His voice softened. "Avery, every day with you feels like a gift. Will you marry me?" Tears rolled freely down Avery's cheeks as she smiled. Before she could answer, Savannah bounced excitedly. "Say yes." Jordan nodded enthusiastically. Mason grinned. Harper wiped away her own tears. Avery laughed through her emotions and looked at the 5 people who had become her entire world. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course I will." Cheers erupted immediately. The children surrounded them as Grant slipped the ring onto her finger. The sunset bathed the family in golden light while waves rolled softly onto the shore. Later that evening, Harper completed one final drawing. 6 figures stood together beneath a glowing sky, holding hands beside the water. Above them, she carefully wrote a single word: home.